Lesson one about the report. So again, as I mentioned, we had over 900 marketers this year participate. It is the third annual report. In 2021, we had about 400 participants in the research. 2022, there was about 600, and 2023, again, over 900. So the survey went from April 26th to July 12th, 2023. So again, just to give you a little context, GPT-4 came out, I think, in the middle of March 2023. So this research was happening. It was in the field after GPT-4 had come out, and people were able to start seeing the impact of that. There's 15 questions plus 6 questions about just basic demographics, which I'll walk through in a moment who the respondents were. Total of 918 people. Pretty impressive. 96% of them did the entire survey. So oftentimes you'll see a drop off after, the first 5 or 10 questions, but we had 96% completion rate, which is great. And then one thing to really keep in mind here is the audience. And anytime you read any research, there's always some level of bias in it. The first thing I look at when I am analyzing a research report is the methodology and who did it. And so in our case, I think it's important to know that the survey was primarily promoted through Marketing AI Institute. So our website, there was pop-ups on the website about it. It went in our newsletter. Mike and I talked about it on the podcast. Webinars during that time period, we would promote people to go take the survey. So these respondents have somewhat of a predisposition to either be interested in AI or already using it, or at least be aware of it, because they're likely already involved with Marketing AI Institute in some capacity, whether it's attending an event or reading the newsletter, listening to the podcast. So there's a really good chance that these 918 people are probably earlier adopters than the vast majority of the marketing world. So if we think there's roughly 13 million marketers worldwide, there's a pretty good chance that the 60,000 or so people who subscribe to the Institute are more in the early adopter category. So I say that meaning what we see here in terms of like adoption and daily usage and where their companies are at is probably actually more advanced than what the general marketing world would be. So, if you feel like some of this may actually be a little further behind, that's possibly true depending on the company you're in or the industry you work in, things like that. So taking a look at the respondents, 61% were director level and above. This is really important to us. We want to see that number keep growing each year because oftentimes for some of the questions we're going to get into, some of the key findings we'll get into, it's really important to have sort of this director level and above perspective. We want the C-suite, obviously, but realistically, you're going to be looking at kind of directors and VPs as making up more of the audience that are likely to take a survey like this. We also look at the areas they're involved in, and this is a multiple choice question. We have asked this every year, and content marketing has been the number one answer every year. But you can see it's pretty well split off. So you've got 83% of people say they're involved in content in some capacity, email marketing at 68%, social at 67%. And then it kind of keeps going down. But there's, what do we have here? Like 5 or 6 that are 50% or more. And so a lot of times people are involved in multiple areas, especially if you're dealing with directors and VPs. They're going to, be involved in a lot of different components of the marketing program overall. And then we look at industry. Ours is pretty heavy professional services, and that's going to be law firms, accounting firms. Maybe it's probably going to be marketing agencies for sure, consultants, freelancers. They're probably going to put themselves in that professional services category. So that's the biggest percentage for sure. Software, 14%, other, and then it starts getting into a pretty diverse mix between that 7 and 2% range. And we're seeing that starting to evolve. Like we're seeing a lot more retail subscribers, publishing industry for sure, finance, healthcare. And what we find is these ones that are maybe lower represented in terms of the percentage, they'll have a significant amount of people and they tend to be the bigger companies. So like, for example, in healthcare, there's just fewer healthcare companies. But the ones that we have, like big hospital systems, they may have 20 or 30 people subscribed to the Institute. So some of these industries that aren't as well represented, they tend to have much bigger companies. And then when we look at the response data, those tend to be kind of the, $1 billion plus companies. And then we also want to get a sense of B2B versus B2C. B2B is definitely the dominant here. Now, we ask, are you B2B, B2C, or both? And you can see that when you combine B2B and both, it's 88%, meaning 88% of people who do this are working in B2B, and they may also be involved in B2C. Only 10% are exclusively in the B2C realm. And then the final one here is revenue and employee size, which are obviously going to run similar, roughly in parallel to each other. So 57% work at 10 million and under, so certainly the small business crowd. But there's also an increasing growth in the large enterprise world. So 26% come from companies with 50 million or more, depending on where you kind of mark that number of sort of the large enterprise, 250 million or 500 million or a billion. This is one that we're seeing significant increase. I think in 2024, you'll probably see much larger number of people working at these big companies, because what happened post ChatGPT is a massive influx of large enterprises started subscribing to the Institute, and a lot of director level and above. So those are the kinds of people we're seeing really start following what's going on with AI and starting to get much more involved. So I think in the 2024 research, when we do it, we're much more likely to have a larger representation from those groups. And then the employee count is going to, roughly mirror the revenue count. So there's no real surprises there. 53% work at companies with 50 or fewer employees. So, and just like contextually, I think in the United States, it's something like 98 or 99% of all businesses are small businesses, but about 50% or so of people work at kind of these larger enterprises. So these numbers are pretty reflective of what I would expect in this area. So again, this just gives you a sense of the methodology, and it gives you a sense of the representation of the respondents. And again, just as like a overall recommendation, anytime you read any research, go right to the methodology and the respondents. Sometimes what happens is the mainstream media latches on to some sensational data point from a study or research. And then when you drill into it, you realize that there maybe had a very small sample size, or it wasn't really representative of the group of people that you're interested in learning about. So you can make data say a lot of things, and we try and take the approach of being extremely transparent about how we do this, who takes it. It's not necessarily, these respondent base isn't necessarily representative of our overall subscriber base at this point, but it's pretty close, at least at that snapshot in time in roughly summer of 2023.